Are you a League of Legends support player who wants to find a champion that has engage potential, incredible peeling, and some of the best map control in the game? On top of this, are you looking for a champion that is easy to play mechanically so that you can focus your attention on other aspects of the game such as rotations, teamfight positioning, and fundamental vision control? Well, look no further, because with this guide, I will provide you with the must-know concepts of how to play Maokai support such that you will climb infinite LP. I guarantee that you will hit diamond within one split if you truly grasp the concepts I'm about to share with you. I'll be going over items, runes, and gameplay tips in this Maokai support guide. Maokai is a champion that has multiple different build paths that can work in any elo. His diversity in build paths means that you have to assess the situation to determine which items you want to build towards. In general, you will want to build Maokai as tanky as possible while keeping in mind how much gold you have accumulated in-game versus the enemy support. To begin the game, I always buy the standard relic shield plus 2 pots. You will want to use your stacks on your support item on the 2 melee minions in the second wave to try to establish level 2 early. One important tip is to not greed too much health to try and hit level 2 first. There will be some lanes where the enemy level 1 has too much pressure, so it's okay to concede pressure a bit and hit level 2 afterwards in order to not sacrifice too much health. My first buy is always Boots of Speed, as movement speed is one of Maokai's most important stats. It helps me as a support to both return to lane faster, dodge skill shots in lane, and rotate between lanes to help my jungler out. After buying boots, there is some decision making process I use to determine what to buy based on the gold value I have. If I have 400 to 500 gold, I would buy a control ward plus a ruby crystal. Additional health on Maokai is never a bad choice. However, if my back is delayed or I have a spike in income due to a positive teamfight, I usually upgrade my boots of speed into a tier 2 boots. The two type of boots I almost always buy are either lucidity boots or boots of swiftness. Lucidity boots are a great purchase as CDR is extremely important on Maokai to continually cycle through his spells. This inadvertently will also reduce the timer on his passive, making him tanky in teamfights. Boots of Swiftness is also a great buy as it allows you to rotate between lanes extremely quickly, while also being able to pressure lane more effectively since you will be able to dodge abilities while positioning aggressively. I generally decide between the two boots based on how the game state is going at around the 8-minute mark. The primary questions I like to ask myself is, are the teamfights long, drawn-out fights with lots of spell cooldown usage? Does the enemy team have multiple divers? Does the enemy team have a lot of movement slows in their kit? Do I need to be more of an engager on key targets? Do I need to be more of a peeler against key targets? If you do decide to build Boots of Swiftness, it is generally preferred to also purchase Winged Moonplate as well, which often builds into Deadman's Plate, since you can abuse the 5% increased movement speed to its fullest extent. Being able to zoom this fast on the map is extremely fun, and it is nearly impossible to outrun you as Maokai support. Try to make sure that someone else on your team is also able to catch up with you and destroy the enemy. More expensive boot options such as Steel Caps and Merc Treads are viable options too if you feel the enemy has 2 or more auto attack carries or heavy amounts of hard CC. Although there are many builds for Maokai support, in this guide I will primarily focus on the most common mythic item I like to purchase, Radiant Virtue. This mythic item is extremely strong on Maokai and provides him with a huge health pool to boost his tankiness, which also scales well with his abilities. Upon casting your ultimate, you will gain an increased maximum health pool of 12.5% for 9 seconds, while healing your teammates for 2.5% of your health every 3 seconds while transcended. At 2.5 items, you will be extremely tanky in teamfights while providing a mini redemption for nearby allies. Once you've purchased your mythic item, it's time to build towards your legendary items. Since you are playing a support role, your income will be limited, meaning you will only have enough gold to complete one of these items, leaving the rest of your item slots to pink wards or a specific epic item. I'll go through a few legendary items you will want to purchase based on the game state you are playing in. Many of these legendary items scale well with Maokai's bonus health. There are builds where you can buy Deadman's Plate first to snowball the game quickly in your team's favor. However, it is still possible to buy Deadman's Plate as a second item after Radiant Virtue. I would only want to buy this item if I had also made a prior decision to buy Swifty Boots. Deadman's Plate is a great item on Maokai since it provides a lot of movement speed value and general tankiness versus AD enemies. The other common legendary item that I would recommend is Knight's Vow. It provides Maokai with a significant health pool and helps spike his build path as the cheapest legendary tank item in the game. It is also helpful to protect your squishy carry as it prevents enemies from bursting them too quickly. 10% of the damage your worthy ally outputs even heals you a fair amount. The only time I would avoid building this item is if there is no ally on your team worth protecting. Against teams where there is a heavy AP comp, it is often worth buying a Negatron Cloak to prevent taking lethal magic damage. You will want to convert your Negatron Cloak into an Abyssal Mask as it provides additional MR based on the amount of enemies you have cursed. You can curse enemies by simply being within 550 units of them, which isn't too difficult since you are a melee champion. The other effect of Abyssal Mask is that it reduces the enemy's magic resistance, which is especially useful if you have a lot of AP on your team to enhance their damage. Overall, Abyssal Mask is a cost-effective magic resist item that works well on Maokai support versus a heavy AP comp, or if your team relies on AP to do damage. Against teams where there is a heavy AD comp, Knight's Vow is usually going to be the armor item you will buy, but sometimes it can be difficult to find a worthy ally. In this scenario, if you are uncomfortable investing your gold into protecting a worthy enough ally, consider building Frozen Heart. Frozen Heart is one of the highest armor items you can build in the game, and it provides ability haste, which is one of the most crucial stats for Maokai to have. In addition to just having tons of armor, both the passives of Frozen Heart work especially well on Maokai. Rock Solid makes you extra tanky against basic attacks that scales off your maximum health, while Cryo causes nearby enemies to have 20% reduced attack speed. In general, when choosing your legendary item, you will often only have enough gold to buy one of them, and perhaps build towards a second one if you have an influx of gold. It's important to build items against whatever the enemy's team win condition is, and or build towards whatever your own team's win condition is. Since you are a Maokai support, it is unlikely you will be able to complete a second legendary item before the game is over. However, with your additional item slot, there are a few important epic items that you can buy based on the enemy team composition. If the enemy team has significant healing for auto attack based champions, consider buying a Bramble Vest. This will apply grievous wounds, reducing their healing, and will also provide you with an ample amount of armor. If the enemy team has significant healing due to an enchanter and can heal from long range or the use of abilities, I would instead opt for an Oblivion Orb. You won't be as tanky compared to buying a Bramble Vest, but it is very easy to damage enemies and apply grievous wounds through either saplings or simply Maokai's ultimate. As a support player, your gold is very limited, and you only need to buy these items without converting them into their full legendary status. Overall, these two epic items are usually only required in enemy team comps that have significant healing. It is usually not worth buying for fun, since it will delay your build path for more important mythic or legendary items. Remember that you want to prioritize your itemization against the enemy's win condition. If the enemy's win condition is based around healing, then anti-heal is required. If healing is only a small portion of the enemy's team composition, then I'd rather invest towards finishing a legendary item instead. Delaying your build by 800 gold is an important decision you need to make. Although Maokai has a variety of rune choices to run in the top and jungle position, for support, you will specifically want to always run Aftershock as your primary rune choice. Aftershock provides you with extra tankiness if you choose to engage. The additional tankiness lasts 2.5 seconds, providing you with an insane amount of stats. This doesn't even take into consideration the bonus 80% armor and MR you will build throughout the game. As an engage support, it is often your job to absorb as much damage as possible and buy enough time for your carries to DPS the enemy team. Font of Life should be the only rune you take from the second row of the resolve tree, as Shield Bash is useless on Maokai. I prefer to take Font of Life over Demolish since it is very easy to either slow or immobilize champions to help your carries heal up. What's additionally insane about this rune is that the healing scales off your maximum health, meaning your allies can heal an additional 30 to 40 HP per auto in teamfights. There will almost never be a time where Font of Life is not procced with Maokai's kit. The third row of the resolve tree is where there can be some variety in choice. Bone Plating is an early game rune which helps protect you from all-ins from an enemy support. The downside of this rune choice is that it can be easily procced in lane and has a high cooldown. I generally only take this versus all-in supports such as Nautilus, Rel, or Leona. Second Wind is a rune choice you will want to take versus early poke supports. Maokai's range is extremely small, so it is very easy for enemy supports to take advantage of Maokai's lack of range, meaning they can very safely poke you from a distance. In order to sustain through Maokai's weak laning phase, Second Wind provides a lot of value if you think you will be poked out every 10 seconds. If you find you are facing against an AP mage support such as Zyra, Vel'Koz, or Xerath, Second Wind is a great choice to pick. Conditioning is the rune choice that scales well into the late game. It only activates after 12 minutes, so you'll be generally weaker in the early game, but it is a worthy investment if you are not punished by the enemy bot duo. I generally take this rune if I feel that the enemy support won't be all-inning me and does not have too much poke. Finish off the resolve tree with unflinching. It's always nice to have additional tenacity on a frontline tank support since you will be more often than not absorbing incoming CC for your team. In the secondary tree, Hextech Flash Traption, or Hex Flash, is something I take quite often since it increases the threat range of my Twisted Advance. Without Flash, the enemy support will know my threat range is very small, so Hex Flash provides my carry with additional room to farm in lane. To use Hex Flash most effectively, I wait in a bush just outside of vision of the enemy laner and hold the flash key until I'm ready to surprise engage on an unprepared and mispositioned enemy. Simply having the threat of being able to engage on an enemy applies a significant amount of pressure on the enemy team. Bringing this rune is also super comforting, knowing that if I do burn my regular flash, it won't be a devastating cooldown since I can still Hex Flash every 15 to 20 seconds. Biscuit Delivery is great for sustain and additional mana throughout the game. There are several instances where I am out of mana in lane and the enemy thinks they can abuse my low mana pool. You can instantly restore 40 mana and surprise the enemy with a knockup or root once they are out of position. It also provides sustain in general versus poke support. In laning phase, Maokai is not the strongest support, and you have to have a clear understanding of when you can or cannot engage. Maokai wants to avoid laning as soon as possible and make use of his roaming potential and provide map pressure and control with his saplings. He acts much better as a secondary jungler rather than an ADC support. There are generally a few matchup scenarios you will face when playing as Maokai support. Remember, support are the champions who dictate the pace of the lane. If you are in a tank vs tank support matchup, I like to call this lane the handshake lane. You don't have to play overly aggressive, but not overly timid as well. You want to look into the other support's eye and threaten to engage. But both of you know that will only really happen if one of you have a jungler nearby to turn it into a 3v2. Simply keeping the threat of engaging on a poorly mispositioned AD carry means you apply enough pressure for the enemy ADC to be somewhat hesitant of when they can farm. You want to save your engage on the enemy ADC if they do misposition. Conversely, if the enemy support somehow catches your ADC, you can do the same and catch their ADC to prevent them from doing damage. I used to think that doing nothing in a tank vs tank matchup was wrong, but sometimes it's the right play since you are respecting the enemy support engage potential while threatening with your own kit. Until it is time to roam, play it chill and wait for jungler assistance before transitioning into the roaming phase. I would invest in an early Ruby Crystal in this matchup as opposed to the more standard Tier 2 Boots Rush. If you are in a tank vs enchanter support matchup, I like to play this lane more aggressively. Enchanters are also weak laners, so they generally want to sit back and relax and scale for the late game. Enchanters will generally outscale you, so you want to try and apply as much early game pressure to prevent them from freely scaling. This is where Hex Flash comes in, as it widens your threat area, as Hex Flashing onto a squishy ADC can be devastating. Trading your Flash at level 2 for their Flash at level 2 is a superb trade, since your Hex Flash will be available every 15 to 20 seconds. You can position as aggressively as possible without getting poked out. Play for bush control and hide in the bushes to threaten and engage. Depending on whether your ADC is ahead or not, he should be able to safely lane versus a low threat duo. There should rarely be a scenario where you are flushing out of their trades. This generally means you have played incorrectly and aren't playing aggressively enough to force their flash. The major tip here I would advise is that you need to make sure when you engage, your bot is ready to follow up. Try pinging before you decide to engage so that your bot lane partner is aware of your intentions. Let them know you are looking to all in their AD carry. You must be aware of both you and your carry's position when going for an all-in. If you are in a tank vs poke support matchup, I also like to play this lane aggressively, but I tend to focus the support more since they have no way of healing or escaping themselves once engaged upon. The matchup can be trickier since their poke is extremely annoying to deal with and they will easily outrange you. If you do manage to stay healthy enough with biscuits and second wind, along with proper positioning, you should be able to outscale them since AP poke supports generally don't have enough income to become a viable threat. Although you don't want to lose lane, it can happen when playing against AP poke supports, since that's generally what their strength is. It shouldn't be too difficult to all-in them in these matchups, but if you are unable to, you will have to concede lane gracefully and look into the roaming phase to do more damage to the enemy team. Feel free to buy a refillable potion if you find the poke to be too much to handle. Once the laning phase is complete, we head into the mid game. The essential idea here is that you want to control the mid area as much as possible. This is because mid lane provides you access to either top or bot depending on what different lane states look like. Generally, you are going to be your jungler's best friend, providing him vision control with saplings and wards as well as a bodyguard to catch unsuspecting enemies. You will want to hover around areas where your carries are in order to provide assistance when needed. Your ADC is not always the strongest member, so try to play around whoever is the strongest member of your team, which could mean playing around a solo laner instead. Playing around your strong side of the map helps your team in numerous ways, since there will always be more resources to help dominate in case of any outbreaking teamfights. During the mid game, you can apply pressure on the map by playing in areas that are in fog of war. By hiding your position strategically, it creates pressure on the map against the enemy team since they will be unaware as to whether they can roam freely. Playing the shadows also increases your opportunities to get a pick. An important mindset you want to have when playing League of Legends is not only thinking about where your team wants to go next, but also thinking where the enemy's support will be trying to advance their vision. If you can both deny enemy vision and advance your team's vision, the enemy will have an extremely difficult time gathering information to play the game. The lack of intel causes additional mistakes for you to capitalize on. Unlike other tank supports, Maokai is strong not because he is inherently tanky, but that he can sustain through long fights. You don't really want to engage on 4 enemies alone when your teammates are not around you, because you can easily get bursted. Generally, the best way to play him in teamfights is to use your ultimate to catch a few individuals off guard while your teammates can kill off the rooted enemies. Your ultimate is a great zoning tool that makes teamfights difficult for the enemy team. If, on the off chance, the enemy team gets a good ultimate engage on you, you can immediately throw your ultimate against them to act as a counter engage method. Maokai's ultimate is not only great at engaging, but can act as a disengage tool to allow your team just a few extra seconds to recover from an enemy engage. The most important thing to think about when playing Maokai support is whether or not it's an engaging or peeling type of teamfight. Overall, it's easier to play Maokai as an engaging support since you will simply need to snowball forward in a teamfight. However, there will be scenarios where the enemy is looking for a flank or a backline dive. In those scenarios, you will instead have to think about peeling off key targets before going back on the offensive. The general idea here as tank support is to make sure that for every damage you are absorbing, your carries are able to output similar or ideally even more damage to the enemy team. It's okay to take damage if your carry is also outputting damage. Play as best as you can around your spell cooldowns and know that you can position a bit more aggressively when your spells are available and a bit more defensively during the few seconds your spells are on cooldown. Always be cautious of where your carry is positioned and try to protect them for as long as possible. If you do decide to engage, ensure that your team is close by enough to help support your engage. Pick key targets such as incoming bruisers or assassins. Avoid wasting your root on tanks as you can simply use your body to block them rather than using a key cooldown like Twisted Advance. If you end up using your W on an enemy tank, the enemy will likely know one of your key CC tools are on cooldown, resulting in your team's death. Now, before I share some final tips and tricks on how to best use Maokai's abilities, I want to let you know that there's still a ton of information that I wasn't able to include in this guide. If you want additional in-depth information on my perspective on how to play Maokai support, make sure to check the description box below and browse through my ultimate Maokai support guide. In this Google Doc, You will find everything you will possibly need to know on how to play Maokai Support, where I talk about alternative build options, in-depth ability analysis, counters, and much more. Best of all, it's absolutely free to read and will be continually updated as the meta evolves. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Maokai is one of the easiest support champions to play mechanically, so these tips and tricks should be relatively simple to implement in your next game. Your priority in leveling up abilities should always remain in the following order: R, Q, W, E. Maokai's passive, Sap Magic, is activated where his auto attack will periodically heal him between 4 to 12% of his maximum health. This passive is what makes Maokai deceptively tanky, as it will quickly reduce in cooldown anytime he casts an ability or even absorbs an ability in teamfights. Your basic combo on Maokai will be W, then Q. Twisted Advance will transport you behind the enemy unit, meaning you can follow up the CC with a knock-up and stun the enemy towards your team. It's important to note that Twisted Advance has a very small range, so you may need to flash engage on the target unit. This is also why movement speed is so crucial on Maokai to make up for the lack of range on his W. Additionally, Maokai's W ability can be used to avoid unique abilities if timed correctly. You can avoid key skill shots like RA Charm, Twisted Fate's Gold card, or even Karthus' ultimate. Maokai saplings are what make Maokai so great at map control, since he provides additional temporary vision around the map in unwarded spots anytime a champion walks nearby his saplings. I always make sure to throw Maokai saplings first into a bush before entering Fog of War. Lastly, Maokai's ultimate, Nature's Grasp, is a wide AoE route which helps catch unsuspecting enemies from afar. The farther the ultimate travels, the longer the route duration is, up to 2.6 seconds. It's best to use this ability from Fog of War, since this means the enemies will have less time to react to your engage. There are many unique angles you can use with this ultimate in order to increase the likelihood that you trap the enemies in a choke point or against a wall. Here is one of my favorite Maokai Support ultimate engage angles. Thanks for watching this Maokai Support guide. If you like this content, make sure to hit that like button. I'll also be releasing additional content around Maokai Support, so consider hitting that subscribe button too. It really does help. If you have any thoughts regarding Maokai Support, please let me know in the comments below.